Okay, well, thanks for having me. This is a strategic metals property. It's called the Batt property in southwest Yukon. And even though the colors are a little bit faded on this title slide, you can see the picture on the left, obviously your malachite sitting there in a quartz carbonate vein, and then this pink mineral, which is erythrite, which is basically a cobalt arsenide, or arsenate. And I'm going to talk today about what we think is a multi-phase copper, cobalt, gold mineralization in southwest Yukon that kind of been known about, but not really. And so I would classify it as a new discovery here. And on the right, you see this is a massive chalcopyrite with a little bit of quartz infill in there. So it's pretty exciting stuff. Forward-looking statement. Don't need to really go into that in any detail. So it's located down here in southwest Yukon, about 60 kilometers south of Haines Junction, about 20 kilometers off of the Haines Road, 100% owned by Strategic Metals. It's within the traditional territory of Champagne and Ajax First Nations. And Strategic Metals, I think they may have even been the first ones to do this, but they've had an exploration benefits agreement that was signed with Champagne Ajax back in 2018, and a really good working relationship with the guys out of Haines Junction. What the Batt property is a very high grade, well, I consider very high grade copper, gold, and cobalt mineralization, and I think it's related to at least two different separate events. One, a Devonian to Mississippian VMS, and another one, and I put a sort of a question mark because we're not entirely sure, maybe porphyry mineralization, possibly of a Oligocene to Miocene age. And I'll go into why I think it's porphyry and maybe why it's a Oligocene and maybe not, maybe an older porphyry. Samples here are grading up to 19% copper, over 2% cobalt, and up to almost 5 grams gold. And I'd like to emphasize the fact that we really haven't done a whole lot of work on this property. This is really grassroots. We haven't, there's obviously been no drilling. There's been very little soil sampling, a little bit of prospective mapping. So it's pretty exciting. The critical metals space right now is pretty important. And I just want to, I'm not going to go too much into detail about cobalt. Other than saying, most of the cobalt that's mined is a byproduct of some other kind of deposit. And usually it's a nickel and copper sulfide deposit of some kind. There are some nickel cobalt laterites. And then there's these submarine nodules and crusts, which basically you can just cross that off because no one's ever going to mine those in our lifetimes. But the important thing here is that just have a look at the grades over here. 1% cobalt in anything is extremely high grade. And they're mining and extracting cobalt down to 100 ppm. So as long as you've got these other minerals, copper, nickel, or whatever, as your main source, if you've got high grade cobalt, you're pretty much off to the races here. And I'd like to, just throw this in, the syn sedimentary or diagenetic spectrum of where you might find cobalt. And this is including BMS. I mean, you just have to look south of the border to Windy Craggy at 0.66% cobalt with all the copper that they have. Okay, so getting right into it here, the Batt property, and there's a reason why I'm showing the entire Cordillera here. Batt property is underlain by rocks of Wrangellia. Wrangellia, as most people are aware, is found in southwest Yukon here up into Alaska, and then all the way down here into Vancouver Island. It's found, as I said, along the entire length of the Canadian Cordillera and into Alaska, accreted sometime in the early to middle Jurassic. And it's composed, at least the basement, is composed primarily of Devonian to Permian volcanic and volcaniclastic rocks, overlain by the Triassic flood basalts, which are pretty much the hallmark of Wrangellia. But to me, it's way more interesting to talk about the Devonian Permian rocks. And as I said, they're found all the way along here, which I'll come back to a little bit later on. Jump right into the sort of the regional geology right around the Batt. Again, Wrangellia in this region is characterized by these latest Devonian to Pennsylvanian volcanic and volcaniclastic stratigraphy of what's called the Station Creek Formation. And then that's shown here in this gray color, which probably looks white to everybody else. And then, Permian, Hasten Creek up in through here, but generally right around the Batt, we're dealing mainly with this mainly volcanic and volcaniclastic stratigraphy. It's intruded by late Triassic Mount Beaton Suite, which is shown here in red, which unto itself, I don't need to go into details about Southwest Yukon, but that late Triassic age for intrusions is actually quite a bit different. And it may or may not play a role into this, but it is fascinating. And it's also intruded by dikes and stocks of the Oligocene and Miocene intrusions that you find all the way up the coast here. And it's bound by the Denali and the Duke River faults, as you can see here. So the stratigraphy itself, right on the property, you can see a property bound right in through here. It's, as I said before, it's underlain by these rocks by the Station Creek Formation and intruded by those Triassic and Oligocene rocks. The rocks are slightly deformed along these northwest trending folds and through here and cut by north and northwest trending structures. But generally speaking, the deformation here is really localized around, the fault zones and, pretty tightly constrained shear zones. The metamorphism is pretty much limited to hornfelsing around the plutons, a little bit of maybe subgreen schist, but nothing too major. Okay, so as I was saying, this Station Creek Formation and through here, this latest Devonian into the Carboniferous volcanic package. The important rocks that we're going to be talking about, or at least what I'm going to be showing you, is part of this lower Station Creek Formation. And there's an age from the YGS, I think they dated this back in 2008, comes back as a 353 million age, so right at that early Mississippian part of the stratigraphic section here. And that's pretty important for some stuff I'll talk to you about in a little bit. But it's defined mainly by pillow-basalts, massive basalt flows, pillow breccias, and near the top especially you get into these sort of intermediate to somewhat felsic-looking tuffs and volcanics, which again is important. Leading up to the mineralization story, getting the setting into your brain. If we look at some of the geochemistry, the YGS did some geochemistry on these rocks a while ago. The lower Station Creek Formation is geochemically characterized by tholeiitic basalt to alkali basalts. And really importantly, these back arc basin to end morb signatures. And these stratigraphic and tectonic environments in these back arcs are very favorable for the formation of these VMS deposits. And if we look at VMS deposits generally, this is a diagram from Galli et al. in 2007. And the key features of all VMS, and anyone that's worked in these knows these systems pretty well, and it's basically your alteration, your mineralizing system or architecture, basically what this is right in through here. And then sort of your metal content, so is it copper rich, is it zinc rich, is it, these kinds of things. And I think I'm going to take you through some of the stratigraphy that we're seeing, and I'm going to place what I think we're seeing into this architecture of a VMS. So if we look at just sort of the alteration that we're starting to see, these are some of the basalts. This is a basalt breccia. This is a massive basalt. And this is, again, another basalt breccia over here. But very strong sericite to chlorite alteration. And it's commonly observed in and around areas where this brecciation occurs. The sericite and chlorite is composing much of the matrix of the pillow breccias. And then locally, you actually get sulfide class. Here's one right in through here within this breccia. So that's saying that there is some sulfides around that's actually making up part of these breccias. So this is, it's forming right at that time. Just go back for a second. So I think, if you look at that section of a VMS, you're kind of sitting somewhere in here with these photos. You're looking at the chlorite sericite alteration. And I will talk a little bit about this jasper as well on this next slide. So anybody that's ever read anything about the VMS deposits out in New Brunswick, they know that generally speaking, you get these jasper, magnetite, exalite horizons sitting right on top of the sulfide deposits. Here, there's a picture. These are jasper, magnetite, exalites right in through here. It's 15 meters thick, sitting in through here like this. Very, very, very magnetite rich. Lots of pyrite in through here as well. Here we've got jasper, quartz, epidote infilling in between some of the pillow basalts. And here we've got massive magnetite that is found within the sequence of volcanic rocks. And again, if you take that sort of scenario in a VMS section, you've got here showing these massive magnetite jasper horizons that blanket the entire mineralizing system. And off in the periphery, you get these jasper, quartz, epidote infills within your basalt package in through here, which we see exactly in here. And all of which these are indicative of vent-related xalite deposits. Okay, now we step into some of the alterations, some of the mineralization. I think we're kind of looking somewhere in through here. Here, there's one really good example of quartz sulfide breccian stockwork zone that are cutting up through the basalt columns. You can see, the basalt stratigraphy. This photo down here, it's a little bit hard to see. It's quite steep and it's kind of a weird angle to the photo, but you can kind of make out the volcanic stratigraphy in through here. And this alteration breccia zone sort of cuts up through it. And what this looks like is you've got an intense amount of sericite, quartz, silicic alteration of your basalt package in through here. And a chip sample, a 2-meter chip sample across here came back as 4 grams gold, 0.5% copper, and 7 ppm cobalt, which was pretty exciting because when I took this chip sample, I was maybe expecting a little bit of copper because there's malachite and a little bit of azurite, and a little bit of sulfides, but I thought the sulfides were mainly pyrite. But obviously there's a little bit more going on than what I thought. And I think we're sort of in this section of the system, somewhere below the main sulfide horizon where you get all these, the brecciation and mineralization in here. And another example of this, I think we're getting up a little bit higher in the system, but we're still within that brecciated area. We get strongly silicified basalts with stringers of quartz and minor quartz infill breccias. Localized massive to semi-massive sulfides, and most of it is in this locality anyway, is chalcopyrite to pyrite. And I say at least 1 meter wide. It was really difficult to actually expose any of this at the time, just because there's a huge blanket of overburden. But we did manage to get a little bit of outcrop. And so we came up with 8.72% copper. This is where we start seeing a little bit of zinc, suggesting that there is a zinc within this sulfide or this VMS sort of mineralization. 19 grams silver, and still quite elevated 488 ppm cobalt. Sort of a sample just off here, we took a sort of a higher grade, sort of 1/2 meter wide zone of the massive sulfide, which came back as over 10% copper, a little bit of silver in through there, and then even more elevated cobalt in there. It'd be really nice to get back in there and have a look at this in a little bit more detail. And then finally, the actual massive sulfide itself. Again, this is very early on. We haven't seen a whole lot of this property yet, but we have uncovered some in situ massive sulfide, which is nice to see. It's actually there. Other than there are boulders of massive chalcopyrite that we have found, grading up to 20% copper and some significant silver mixed in with it. Here's a sulfide lens, the only real in situ massive sulfide we've found to date. But again, semi-massive to massive, mainly pyrite with some chalcopyrite, but over 2 meters wide at 1.3 copper, and elevated 175 cobalt and a little bit of silver. There's also massive pyrrhotite that we found as boulders mainly. But again, up around 2%, and you're getting into the 0.18% cobalt in the instances where you're finding pyrrhotite, suggesting that you're at least in this circumstance, your cobalt is going up with the presence of your pyrrhotite here. And again, I think we're sort of sitting somewhere around in here. We haven't found the great big 50-meter, couple 100-meter wide lens yet, but it's definitely there, I think. Forward-looking statement. It's a good thing Heather's name is on that. Okay, we've only done a little bit of soil sampling across this whole thing. And last year, the guys that were out soil sampling, Kieran, I think you're in the audience here, our camp was way over here, and it's quite a hike to get out here. So these guys actually did quite a heck of a good job, even getting as many soils as we have here. But you can see, as I say, there's limited amount. There's strongly elevated copper everywhere. You can't read these numbers at all. I can barely read them. But I'll tell you that you can probably see the yellow. The yellow in for copper is already at 200 to 500 ppm copper. So we've got up to 0.5% copper in soils in this area. Quite a bit of zinc in certain areas, and then, of course, cobalt. There is this area called Main Ridge, which I will get to in a little bit here, but I want to take that out of the equation. Just look down in here where we've got overlapping copper, zinc, and cobalt signature. And so you've got that VMS sort of signature within your soils in an area that we have really done no exploration. And so we have to go back and actually check out. And that's 700 meters. That's a fairly significant multi-element geochemical signature that we really need to follow up on. So going back to Al Galli's, he's divided different kinds of VMS deposits mainly based on their stratigraphic environment and tectonic sort of environment. Likely what we're seeing, and it's very early stage obviously, the VMS mineralization at the Batt probably falls within this back arc mafic in through here, but a little bit of bimodals in there because we do have a little bit of that felsic and intermediate tuffs, especially near the top of the sequence. And there is massive purite associated with these guys a little bit more. So we might see a little bit of a hybrid going from back arc to these mafic bimodal things. And go back to this, where else do we see Rangelia and VMS deposits? Well, you just go to the island and Myra Falls, same age, same tectonic environment, and bona fide VMS deposits that have been mined in the past. So, there's a good connection there. So now we'll jump up briefly into this Main Ridge area. There has been cobalt mineralization associated with some old min files that were looked at back in the 70s in this area and through here, and it pretty much laid dormant for quite a long time. In 2008, the Yukon Geological Survey had a mapping program in here, and Rosie Cobalt, who was working at that time, came across this thing. You can see the pink of the erythrite there, and the darker, which may or may not be cobaltite. It's super fine grain. But anyway, she found that, and it came back in an assay almost 1% or just over 1% cobalt. So Doug, being Doug, and thinking outside the box at that time, he staked this based on some of this. And so we went back and had a look. And this is the Main Ridge setting. Don't have a whole lot of time here, but essentially what we're dealing with is some of the older volcanic sequences that are intruded by younger intrusions, porphyries for the main part. And it's cut by several series of faults, mainly brittle, a little bit of brittle ductile faulting, but mainly brittle faulting, and cuts through the entire sequence and through here. The Rosie showing, which was named after Rosie, after that little spot that she found there, and then the saddle showing, and through here are the main, but I can say that there's mineralization all the way through here, and I just don't have enough time to go through all of it. This is what that Main Ridge looks like. There's faults and veins through this entire thing. The main sort of structures, which I had on there, kind of run like this. This is sort of an oblique view. It is still dipping down in this direction. But you can see, well, probably not, you probably can't see, some of the numbers in through here. That's 2.8% cobalt with 2 grams gold, 5% copper. Here's another one up in through here, over 1% cobalt with over 1 gram gold. And here, 1.9 copper, 1.9 gold over 1.6 meters. So there's mineralization along this entire ridge that's giving you really super high-grade copper mineralization. And these are within quartz and quartz carbonate veins and shears up to 30 centimeters to up to several meters wide. And what these things look like, here you see quartz carbonate veining. Again, just highlights 1.03 cobalt with 2.3 grams gold and almost 1% copper. And then down here, 1.46%, 1.43 gold, over 30, or sorry, half a meter in through here. And then just from last year is 0.2% cobalt and 1.5 copper over a 2-meter width in through here. So it's pretty significant mineralization. Looking at the saddle showing, there's a hand trench in through here. You can see that we cut down through here, 1.7 gold, elevated 0.13 cobalt and 0.35 copper, over 3.3 meters. Just upslope from that, we've got this super oxidized looking stuff, 4.5 grams gold, super elevated still copper or cobalt at 503 ppm, and then over 1 meter. And that's just up in this area and through here. So last year we dug some trenches in between the two. This is the only one that I've got time really to talk about, but you can see over a width of 5.7 meters, 1.8 gold, 0.2 cobalt, and 0.7 copper. So we've got some really excellent, elevated, high-grade mineralization in this area that we have to follow up on. So why do I say this might be porphyry-related? In the area, there are several min-file occurrences that are epithermal and porphyry, at least listed. I think Jerry Carlson, I had a look at some of your stuff way back from some of the core, and there's a bona fide porphyry alteration in through here. And this high-grade veins might be related to porphyry system. The quartz carbonate veining might be coming up from distal parts of these porphyries. And again, it's something maybe like this. I like to throw cartoons always at the end of my talk. But so you've got your Mississippian VMS mineralization developed within your basalt package. And then later, maybe in the Oligocene, and I say Oligocene for reasons. I've seen a lot of these rocks and they don't look Triassic or Cretaceous to me. But it might be coming up through during deformation, scavenging some of the mineralization and certainly the copper and maybe some of the cobalt from these VMS targets and transferring them up into the veins associated with the porphyry system. So as a summary, these are definitely not conclusions. VMS with overprinting high-grade copper and cobalt. There's a really good potential for large massive sulfide occurrences in the lower Station Creek Formation. High-grade veins and related copper, cobalt could be related to these younger Oligocene porphyries. And is it possible that these hydrothermal fluids around these younger intrusions are scavenging some of this material? And I think that's it. Any questions? Thank you.